This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 214.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. Today, I have the guest with the hardest name ever on this podcast. And although his qualities don't end there, I'm going to take a stab at saying his name. It's Ganesh, easy, Bart, Venkataramanan. Venkataramanan. Got it. He makes a joke about his name later on. But he's a great person to actually have on the podcast, leader of global sales at a company called AVEVA. And we talked about so many different things, but mainly about being able to think and learn and how he actually looks to find SEs that can actually do that, because some things that are easily taught, some things are not. And it was just a great call altogether with Ganesh, and we covered so many topics. I'm actually gonna not talk about all of them right now. Let's just jump into the show and you can see what I'm talking about and judge for yourself at that point. I'll see you after the show. Good morning, Ganesh. How you doing?
Hello. Hey, Ramsey. How are you?
I'm doing well. We've been talking for like 10 minutes about something completely unrelated, which was fun. But now let's get down to business. Yep. Who are you and what are you doing here?
Okay. Yeah, good question. Sometimes I wonder that myself, but I'll introduce myself. My name is Ganesh Venkataramanan. And before you ask, there's 14 letters to the last name. Most people do try to count it and see how many A's are there. Okay, I'll leave the A counting to you. And
5.
Okay, good. I am the vice president of pre-sales for AVEVA, which is a software company. I lead up the global accounts region within AVEVA for pre-sales. My background is actually in projects and delivery, and I did that for many, many years. It's probably a good starting point for anyone from a technical sales or pre-sales or sales engineering background, right? To actually get into products and services and use them and deliver them. So, but at some point along the way, I decided I enjoyed sales, and here's where I thought I could make the greatest impact. And as an opportunity came up, I took it.
Nice. So sales engineering is a stressful job. Not as stressful as sales potentially, but still stressful. You're having a lot of people telling you what to do, and customers that could be upset with you, could be happy with you. We don't know. Why would anyone want to become VP of anything? Like, why did you want to move up the ranks, and like, how's that affected your life, if any?
Well, I think all of us have a desire to progress, right? And do something more interesting, more challenging, and grow into new areas, right? We're never prepared for the job on day one, right? And it's not that I got in and said, I know exactly what to do, right? But I said, I want to learn to grow in this area and become better at it, What I do think is no matter where we are in the organization, every one of us is a sales guy. Right. When I was doing projects, I thought of myself as a sales guy, saying if I did a good job, right, I am more likely to find out about the next potential deal here than the sales guy is, right? Yeah. And so pre-sales and sales engineers tend to perhaps develop a better rapport with clients, right? Because they're not out there to go say, push something, close the deal this quarter, right? We coming in more to say, I wonder what their problem is, and I wonder how we can solve it. So it's a very, it brings together lots of different skill sets. So it's a very interesting progression in most people's careers to say, here's something I want to get good at, and I have some skills, but I can bring in other skills and grow into this area. So I'd recommend everyone at some point in their career to be within pre-sales.
Okay, so how did you go up from pre-sales, sales engineer, to like up the ranks? How did you know that you are qualified? A lot of us have like that imposter syndrome, where we're worried about taking the next step. I know when I got a salary raise when I moved from one company to another to become a pre-sales engineer, my wife was worried that I'm getting paid a lot more than I was getting paid in my previous company, which, by the way, I was severely underpaid. So it's not like I became a millionaire overnight. But how did you get over, if you had it? Did you have imposter syndrome? And if you did, how did you get over it?
We all do, right? I haven't heard the term imposter syndrome, but I like it, so I might use it.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
I'll give you credit the first time, but then it's my turn.
I heard it from somebody else. So feel free to use it. Just use it.
Yeah, I think we feel underqualified for certain things, right? Or say, what happens if I'm in such and such situation, right? And I don't know what to do, or there's certain areas I simply have no idea about. I think a good way to start is simply to say my primary skill is learning, right? And say I'm ready to learn, right? I bring in unique perspectives. There are going to be things I know going in that I don't know, right? It's not going to surprise me when I find out there's something I don't know. I know I don't know a bunch of things, right? It's a given.
Yeah.
Who am I going to fool, right?
Yeah.
As you said, you didn't fool your wife, right? We don't even fool ourselves with this, right? We do know. But we can learn, right? I'm a chemical engineer by background. I took thermodynamics 3 times. Sales engineering is simpler than that. Okay.
Well, I would disagree with that. I mean, from an intellectual perspective, sales engineering is simpler than thermodynamics, but there is no human aspect to thermodynamics,
True.
which is what makes sales engineering difficult. It's because we're like those who came from an engineering background. I always wanted to sit in front of a computer and just break stuff because I was a support engineer,
right,
or build stuff when I was a network design engineer.
Right.
I never had to talk to a human being and convince them to do something or another.
So I'll give you a funny story, right? When I was doing my undergrad, our 4th year or senior year in college, we had to do something called the BTP, BTech project, right?
Okay.
And it was a year-long project, and then you presented to an audience. And I don't know if the audience had 5 people or 500 people, because I never looked up, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you how many times my shoes lazed around because I kept looking at my shoes, right? But if you do something 100 times or 1,000 times or 5,000 times, you're gonna get better at it, right? There is simply no other way to get better at it than to do it multiple times, right? And so over time, as I started doing it more times, I got more comfortable with myself and said, okay, I'm going to stop comparing myself to somebody else. I'm not going to compare myself to Ramzi, because I'm going to take my weaknesses and compare it to his strengths and find out I'm not doing very well, right? And but instead, I'll work to get better. I'll steal some ideas from Ramzi, like imposter syndrome, right? And I'll get better at that process, right? So we had to give ourselves time. And usually, say I came from a background which was not sales engineering, right? But every chance I got in that job, I went on a sales deal, right? I went to work with the sales team and the other teams to present. And so over time, I just got better at it. And I think that's true of everyone. You have to do a few things. You have to go in saying, I don't know all the answers, but I can learn these things.
So how do you know you're getting better at the right thing? I'll give you an example. When I first became a sales engineer, I followed my salesperson around, and he was very good at spray and pray. You're familiar with that term? Or
another new one for me? What is that?
Spray and pray is like you have a big portfolio of products and solutions, and you have them all in a PowerPoint presentation, and you just go like through 200 slides in front of a customer and saying, "Is this interesting for you? Is this interesting for you?" Basically, show up and throw up, see what sticks. That sort of thing. And I started learning that, and I became good at that. And that was the wrong way of doing things. So how do you know if you're down the right path, if you're learning the right things versus the wrong things?
Right. Well, first I would say, as technical folks, right, there's a technical part to us, which is core to us, right? So we want to be always prepared with the right answer, right? But perhaps a better starting point is to come up with a list of right questions to ask, right? Because we don't need to speak then, right? We just have to ask the customer to talk about their pain, right? And most people are perfectly happy talking about their pain. Now, does it take some skills to ask some questions in a way that they would open up? Yes, that's true, right?
Yeah.
And but if we quit thinking about what do I say next, right, and instead prepare with 5 to 7 questions, let's say, let me ask some questions, let me understand them, and say, I'll come back now that I understand your situation, let me come back to you next time and talk a little bit more, right? So then it eases the pressure a little bit, saying I don't have to know all the answers when I don't even know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
The second thing is also to look at others, right? And say, let me look at someone who is good at this and see how they do stuff. I've had the opportunity to come across both, right? Some people who are phenomenal at it and some people who are terrible at it, right? And the contrast is quite clear, and all I can hope is you can find someone who is really good at it and just watch them, see how they approach it, right?
So by the way, I love the podcast mainly because I don't have to do much of the talking. Right? I ask the question and I sit back. So as a sales engineer, it's right into my wheelhouse.
I will ask you a question though.
Go ahead.
Do you prepare going into the podcast saying what question should I ask so that the podcast is interesting and useful?
No, like you saw the level of preparation. I just sent you. We're gonna talk about these things. The reason I don't is because I'm not trying to lead the conversation anywhere. Right? I'm trying to listen and absorb what you have to say, and then if I have these questions prepared, sometimes I find that I will not follow up on something that you said in favor of asking another question, whereas it could have been more interesting to go down a rabbit hole.
Right.
So,
but what you did again was there was a level of preparation, not extensive, not every possible question, right?
yeah.
But enough to start the conversation, and then knowing that you can follow up on it, right?
Yeah.
And get more and more information. And so people should watch this podcast if they want to know how to get better at it.
But when I first started, I would prepare a lot more. Like I prepared maybe 30 questions.
Yeah.
And I noticed that if I just go through these 30 questions, I don't even need to be on the podcast. I can just send those questions to someone and have them recorded. The interesting part is follow-ups. Right. You say like you said something about I just challenged you on something like simple, not like a big challenge, like human thermodynamics. If I had the script, it's like, all right, I wouldn't have went down there. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are right now.
Right. You would have just gone to the next question.
Yes. And as sales engineers, sometimes we end up with especially when we're new, we come up with check boxes, and we don't do the follow-ups. We just like.
That's because we're nervous, right? And well, the reality is everyone is nervous starting out, right? And maybe it's empowering to know I'm not the only one who's nervous.
Yeah.
Right?
Or we don't know the product very well. Sometimes we use that as what's it called? Cane, I guess, support. Right. And because we don't know the right questions. You mentioned having the right questions. So let's talk about that for a bit. I mean, people come in to companies, like you came in, you weren't an SE, but you were exposed to sales. I'm seeing a lot of people right now coming into sales engineering that don't even know what sales engineering was. I was one of them. I went into sales engineering. I had no idea what sales engineering was. How do you convert that person who has no idea what sales engineering is and lead them to becoming good, great, and maybe all-stars? And maybe what differentiates them? That's too many questions. Let's start with the first one.
Right. So let me start with hiring, right? How do we look to say who's the right person to hire? I think one key ingredient of a sales engineer is curiosity, right? The desire just to know things, right? And ask questions, without agendas, without trying to push anything, without thinking, oh, I need to close this and so on. All that is irrelevant, right? It's just simply asking, being curious about things, asking questions. And you see that even when you do interviews, if somebody is applying for a pre-sales engineering or sales engineering role, I would say be prepared with some questions you can ask them. Be curious about the employer you're going to or the team you're going to and so on, right? Understand their point of view, not my point of view, right?
Yeah.
And so when someone has that curiosity, then it is easy to turn them on to the fact that this is a learning process our entire lives, right? It's what you learn after you already know everything that counts.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it can add on the technical aspects. It can add on the the sales. I call it the sales antenna. Some people have the sales antenna. They can sense that here is a need over here that I have that I didn't know about before, but I can sense it now that this is the real question problem the client has. Clients don't always tell us here's a problem, right?
Yeah.
There may be a problem behind the problem which we have to get to, right? We
Yeah.
may find out only surface level problems. So it takes that curiosity to continue to learn, ask questions. Of course, you can't always ask questions. You had to educate the client as well along the way on how they might approach it, right? So it's a interactive process with the client. The way I like to think of it is um, it's a learning journey, right? For our entire lives, it's a learning journey, right? And sometimes people are just simply looking for a magic pill which will get them their next role or their next promotion or their next thing. But if they think of learning not simply as a means to an end, but saying learning is the end, right?
Yeah.
And all of these jobs and promotions and everything that they get are simply milestones along that journey,
Right.
right? Then they simplify stuff, right? And say, yeah, I'm going to continue to learn, which means I don't know everything today, right? If I did, I wouldn't have to learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I know there are things I need to learn. So I really only have to plan on what is it that I want to learn, right? So that's what we look for. We look for people who are curious, look for people who are interested in learning, who'll push themselves in areas that they are not comfortable with, right?
Right.
And so I'll give you an example, right? So somebody could be an expert in a product, whatever be the product. Then comes along the cloud and everybody wants SaaS. And it's like, well, I'm not comfortable with the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Or comes AI and how do you do AI with your stuff? And well, I'm not comfortable with AI. So, well, it's up to me to learn these things, right? Will I be a cloud expert understanding cybersecurity rules to the nth degree? Maybe not, right?
Right.
And would I be the guy writing AI models and machine learning models and recursive neural nets and all that? Maybe not, right? But I have to understand it to a point of how it impacts a client, right? So I can push myself to say, hey, here's something I can focus on the next 3 months and start picking up these skills.
So I've been interviewing people like straight out of university to join our company. And I noticed that a lot of them don't like you. How do you tell someone is curious or not, especially when they're new and nervous in an interview, where all they're trying to do is just answer your questions to the best of their ability because they don't know anything. They just graduated university. I remember when I graduated, nothing. I didn't know anything about networking,
Right.
and I had to get a job in networking. So how do you figure that out between someone new, someone experienced?
Well, so it's been harder with COVID, right? When you brought people in before and you went out to have lunch or dinner or had perhaps conversed with them over a couple of days, they tended to get a little bit more relaxed, you know. With Zoom interviews and so on, it's a little harder to tell, right? But I think it's also actively asking them about here's an area you have expertise in, such as networking. I'm just curious, what are other areas of interest to you, right? And it could be bungee jumping, right?
Right.
And it's fine. I want to start talking to them about it so they start opening up more about it, right?
Yeah.
And then see if we can see other things which interest them and see their curiosity level, right? Are they can I get them to a point? So I'm going to take responsibility, right? Can I get them to a point where they're comfortable enough to start asking some questions?
Right. I can answer your question about bungee jumping. I am not curious about it because I'm 290 pounds. Right? I go down, I'm not coming back up. So, all right.
I'm curious if you will or not. So we should
I am
try.
not. I am not curious at all. Thank you for that. It's like, bye, Ramsey. Okay. And if someone's a little bit more experienced, they probably know how to show some stuff. How do you differentiate like someone being naturally curious versus someone faking curiosity, because we all know almost everyone I talk to says sales engineering is all about curiosity. So those experiences can fake it. How do you differentiate?
Well, you ask them to share their some things they have done where they've been successful, right? And once they start sharing it, start going deeper and deeper into it. People do fake it, and they will try to tag themselves on to somebody else's success, right? But they can only carry it that so far. As you start digging deeper and deeper into it and asking them, why did your team make this decision versus this other decision, right? What was the thought process behind it? And force them to go deeper and deeper into it. You'll find out who really did the work and who just, put their name onto the opportunity.
I was working in network support for a bit, and we had this one issue where it was critical. They put us all in one room, and me and one other person just started asking questions, and turned out to be the right questions. We're going down a rabbit hole to kind of isolate one area, one hub, to figure out like that's the problem. As soon as we got there, someone else jumped in and just started like, oh, it's because of that. It's like,
right.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks for coming for this party.
Success has many fathers, right?
Yeah. So it happens, but he was the most loved in our team because he advertised his success versus other people on the team where they just did the work quietly and went home, which was interesting to me.
Well, and sales engineers can do that. Often we are not the extroverts. We don't, move our hands all the time while we're speaking. We're thinkers, right? And so it is easy for contributions to be missed because people are so quiet sometimes, right? I'm not saying the answer is everybody spend all the time advertising, because then all that opens up as everybody trying to take glory, and but sometimes we are too quiet for our own good.
Well, in that team, the one thing, like, I didn't want to become that person because he was loved by the manager, hated by almost everybody else.
Right.
Which is, he was fine with that. That's good for him. What I learned is just every once in a while, CC the manager on an email where like we're coming to a solution.
Right.
Just CC them, let them know that this was solved. Whereas on the other extreme, where people didn't tell him anything, he just thought they weren't working.
Right.
Except they were taking that person on the extreme like advertising would take the tickets that were already known how to solve and would close them and would advertise, I closed 10 tickets today. Whereas the other guys would take one ticket that's extremely hard and difficult and takes 2 weeks to solve. So, when someone's when a manager is number driven, not actual work driven,
right?
That kind of comes back to bite us in the behind.
Right. And make a point, if you asked me, you contrast these two people, the one who was advertising his own good, so to speak, right? Would I call him a leader? Right?
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't. Okay. And here is why, right? A leader, it's not who decides somebody is a leader. Who decides I'm a leader, right? Is it my boss saying you're a leader? No, it's my team saying here's somebody I want to follow, right?
Yeah.
And so if the rest of the team hates him because essentially what he's doing is advertising, who is he leading, right? So he's not someone I would ever look, if I was conscientious enough to look through everyone there and say, hey, here's the guy who I think can lead a team, right?
Yeah, I mean, the manager lost a lot of team members. I'm not saying because of that, but that's one of the reasons, because it's managing by numbers. Not very great guy. Like, I'm friends with him, but as a manager, he was managing more by numbers than by people. Like, he was a numbers manager more than a people manager.
Right.
Go.
And you need both, right? It's easy to lose sight of the numbers and just think we are doing everything well. So I think there is a value in numbers, but there is not a value in numbers if you don't understand your people and your team, right?
Like, I find numbers are better for like the higher ups. Like, as a manager, my manager is more interested in numbers,
right?
But my people are less interested in numbers and more interested in people. So
yeah,
you kind of have to balance that as a manager. So it's interesting.
Good point. Yeah.
Going back to, like, you have a rookie sales engineer. You found during the interview process you found that this person could become an all-star. How can a leader take a rookie SE? Because I've seen a lot of SEs who could be all-stars that just flounder because they didn't have the right support. How do you make sure that they get to become all-stars for the better of the company and the employee?
Well, so I think it's a planned event. There are people who will become all stars in spite of a company's culture, okay, but that is few and far between, right? And you just happen to luck out. So you have to establish a process, whether it is internal or whether it is external, with people who can help you through the process, which says, how do I work with this person, right? And how do I help them grow? I am actually leading up a program which says, how do I help people grow in their careers, right? And I think you do work in that as well, right? From a consulting perspective on how do you mentor pre-sales engineers, right?
Yeah, coaching and mentoring.
Yeah. So it depends on the company, right? Some people do it internally, right? And some people don't have the bandwidth and everything else, or the right resources and the talent to do it in-house. But if they don't do it, either you lose people, right? Because they feel they're not growing, or the worst case scenario is they stay.
Yep.
And they're unproductive, right? Because we didn't invest into getting them skilled up and performing at a high level, right? Who'll stick around long on a team that they feel is not winning?
Complacent people who are happy with the status quo.
Happy. So, So if you want the all stars, then it is a planned event, right? I say, okay, I have to establish a process to mentor them. What does that mean? What does mentorship mean, right? Is it let's give them some high level philosophy once a month? Okay, maybe there is an aspect to it, but a lot of it is also planning on an opportunity. Let's look at this opportunity. Let's look at what you're dealing with here. How would you approach this, right? And if for example, if I'm asking you this, Ramsey, say, Ramsey, how would you approach this? And you would have 3, 4, 5 things, right? And I want to make it very open for people to make mistakes, right? Technical folks hate making mistakes, right? We shudder at the idea of making mistakes. It makes us cringe, right? But the reality is we're going to make mistakes, right? And the only one who remembers our mistake is us, right? I made a mistake 2 weeks ago in a large presentation with hundreds of people, right? The only one who remembers it is me, right? And maybe it's comic relief for the audience for about a minute, right? But they got so many things on their mind, they're not thinking about me and my mistakes, right? And so I think we make it easier for people to make mistakes, but in a safe environment where it's me and them, right? Let's walk through this process. How are we going to do this? Once I understand their plan, now I can start saying, what about this? What about this? Have you thought of this? How would you approach it if such and such happens, right? And go through this thought exercise, so that as they go through it and they say, I actually do feel well prepared. I have thought through all of these things, right? And so as you go through that process over time, you see who grows and who doesn't grow, right? I do find half the people will try to explain why they do things the way they do things. They can get defensive, right? The reason I'm doing it this way is, and as soon as they start with those words, then they're not comfortable enough yet to hear it and say, hey, this is a good idea, let me add this on to my skills, right? So it takes some time. It takes building trust. It's not a one meeting kind of thing, right? But as you build trust and you help them do something and they watch it succeed in real life, then it dramatically simplifies things. I say, hey, you know what? The last idea I picked up from him really helped me. Let me go and ask him for more ideas.
So here's the thing that I see where a lot of leaders struggle. Like, leaders don't have one person they need to work with. There's 3, 4, 5, 10. My company, I see leaders manage 18 people.
Yeah.
How do you, is it the same process for every single employee? How do you have time to all these and still have to recruit, fire sometimes, work with sales? Like, how do you find the time to do all of that and make sure your SEs are happy with their progress?
Well, I think the best I've seen companies do is perhaps address the top 20%. Right? There's simply not the bandwidth for most people to go work with everybody and say, I'll help everybody. And usually it's top 20%, maybe it's bottom 20% because HR is on your case to do something, right? But there's more than half the organization which people do struggle to develop growth plans and development plans and so on. So eventually, whether they do it internally or they have groups come in and say someone who's focused on helping my team grow, right? I think it has to be systematized into what they do on a daily basis. It can be an afterthought saying, I wonder what's on my list this month, and let me add this on. It has to be a part of how they do things. Yeah, it's a daily habit.
Yeah, like my experience, the companies that I've worked with, it's only the bottom, which is kind of where I fell into that spray and pray methodology for a year and a half. I was doing great. I was hitting my quota. I was top whatever, but I was doing it all wrong because no one had told me, Ramsey, you're doing it wrong. So no one, that's the reason I started the podcast, really.
Right.
Because one day, one of my senior VP of sales witnessed my greatness in spray and pray, and where the customer said, Ramsey, I'm not interested in anything you're talking about. I'm interested in software. And I'm like, but I don't have any presentation about software right now. It's all this. And the VP of sales said, Ramsey, you didn't do discovery. At which point I'm like, what is discovery?
Right.
But I was doing well. And I could have been doing great if someone had told me, Ramsey, discovery is this, and you should go do it. But then I probably won't have the podcast. Go ahead.
One of the reasons that people don't give feedback of this sort is we've become a society which avoids conflict.
Yeah.
We don't. I mean, who's comfortable saying this wasn't the right approach, right? And I'm not saying every meeting has to be a conflict, but I think in every opportunity we are involved in, we should take a look at, say, what didn't go well. I guarantee you there's something which wasn't done as well as it could have been. So the question is, what is it? Without getting defensive about it, we do need a conflict hour, so to speak, just to talk through things which are not going as well as we would like. Right. Yeah. And get people used to the idea that we're not blaming, we're just looking for ways we can get better. Right.
Yeah. And it like usually, like when I go into meetings, it's with salespeople, and their feedback is different than a feedback I would receive from another SE, for example. But a lot of times there is no feedback. It was good.
That's fine. Yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, I did this wrong. I did that wrong. So I guess it's also dependent on the person, if they don't have that support. Sorry.
What is that ultimate goal, right? I think the ultimate goal is to identify what is the customer's true need, right? And the customer may not be a person. It might be a slew of people within an organization. All of them may have different needs, right? And sometimes it's bringing them together in a commonly understood need that is half the work, right?
Yeah.
And but if we connect with that need and show them how they could solve that need and the business impact it has when we solve that need, right? So that's eventually the end goal. Like, I may not show a slide, I may not show a demo, but I could still get to that end goal of helping them understand and solve the problem. And that's more critical than following a slide process necessarily, right?
Yeah. Right. So it seems that the way to get people from being rookie SEs to all-stars is basically being there for them and help coach them versus leaving them in the ether. And the question is, how can we get those, not top 20, not bottom 20, those in the middle, to become all-stars? I think that's something that you and I might have to elaborate or discuss more and figure out, because maybe there isn't an answer today. Or what do you think?
Well, I think knowing that is a big problem is a starting point, right?
Right.
Teams are underperforming, whether it's sales engineering or sales or any part of the organization, because we throw them at a role, right, and let them discover the role for themselves and define the role, right?
Right.
Now, for some people, it's not necessarily that bad, right? When I had multiple roles along my career where the role wasn't defined. I had to go define the role, right? I actually enjoyed doing that, right?
Yep.
But I found out that doesn't work statistically when you're working with large groups of people. They need clarity on what is the role and the definition. How do I do it well? What does success look like in this role, right? And so anyone who's a leader in the organization has to start thinking of, let me define what success looks like to them. Let me help them understand where they are good or bad, right, without getting hopefully defensive, and let me help them walk towards that success, right? None of this happens simply as a side thing to my main job. It's not a side job to my main job, right? It might be my main job, right? Whether I can do it all myself or put it together with a team which brings in different skill sets. Half of it might be outside the company, right? That's just the reality of how you grow a team today, right?
Yeah. Right, Ganesh, I usually move on to a segment called Not So Firearm. These are 4 questions I ask almost every guest.
Okay.
I feel like we have a lot more to talk about based on what we were talking about. So maybe if you have time, we'll come back at a later date and finish this conversation. Yeah. But I feel like it's going to take like 5 hours to actually dig into it. So let's move on to the Not So Firearm and see what you think. And I usually start off by asking, what do you love about sales engineering?
I'm a people person, right? And I like people, right? So I look at when I'm working with a client or I'm working with my team, if I can help them solve that pain, right?
Yeah.
Then that turns me on. I was like, this is something they're struggling with. Help them understand the root causes, help them walk that walk to say, how do I solve this problem? And we know this is the path to solve that problem. And seeing that flip to say, here's a problem I can actually solve. I don't have to deal with this headache a week from now, right?
Yeah.
Or after this is implemented. And so solving that problem is something which I really like, right, as part of sales engineering. Now, I think most people in sales engineering are problem solvers. They do like solving problems. What we often do poorly is we are so busy solving the problem, we don't listen to what the customer is saying. So a part of me has to hold back and say, don't solve the problem too fast. Let them talk. The real problem might be something different, right?
Yeah.
And so help understand them first before you start solving problems. But seeing that change is what I find interesting.
It's interesting. You're an introvert who likes people.
Yes.
It happens.
Yes.
But also, like, we talk about technology being amazing. Technology is only amazing if you solve a problem.
Right.
And go ahead. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a pain, right? One more thing to deal with is, and increasingly like that, we get stuck with system level problems that are simply somebody threw technology at something and it didn't solve any problems. Right?
I mean, if you think about Facebook, it started off solving a problem. People haven't connected with people in a long time. It's I have friends and family in Sweden, Lebanon, all that. It was great. And then it became a problem when it was like they added too much technology and too much to it. So yeah.
I mean, I love being connected, but do I want to be connected every 2 minutes and constantly have things flying at me? I don't, right? Once a week is good enough, right?
So, exactly. All right. So what would you change about the role of sales engineer?
I think we talk too much about technology and products, and not enough about the business impact of what does it do, right?
Right. Yeah.
And because we understand the technology really well, and we are actually fascinated by our own technology, we lose sight of the fact that nobody else cares about our technology, right? They only care about their headaches,
Yeah. About the outcome.
the outcome.
Yeah.
And outcomes are not as easy to figure out, right? If you use my technology, will it have $1 million impact? Will it have a $5 million impact? The reality is, before any company invests money, somebody is going to do that calculation,
Yeah.
right? And if we are not able to articulate that and connect our solution to the person or the people or the teams doing that calculation, what happens is you have no idea what is going on over there, right? What they understood from our technology. They may understand 2% of our technology after our presentation. That's just the reality. We do it all day long, so everything is obvious to us. It's certainly not obvious to anybody else on the other side.
And here's an interesting thing. So I work with the same customers over and over. Their business outcome is known. And because we're working with the same ones, sometimes we forget what the business outcome is.
Right.
And we just start adding features.
Right.
Like, for example, business outcome, they want, like, I work in test and measurement. So the customer wants to test as fast as possible to come out with releases as fast as possible, which will make them money.
Right.
But for us, like, oh, we have this equipment, let's just add more features to it, more features to it, more features to it. Now it's slowed down.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And we're doing the opposite of the
opposite of what they want. Yeah.
Outcome, just because it's cool. Right? And that kind of also goes back to product management. Like, why are we adding all these features?
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, excellent point, right? The natural tendency for any software company, perhaps hardware companies as well, is to keep adding more features, and it gets bulkier and slower and harder to use, right? And the simplicity that people desire disappears over time. And then, the roadmap vision then becomes, let's get a stripped down version of our product. Well, we had a stripped down version of the product before you guys started fooling with it, right? And so I think part of what we have to do is also measure that the value is being developed, is being delivered post sale, right? Which is harder to do because now you've got to be disciplined to measure that post sale, and you need a client who's also willing to share that things are, being measured, right?
And the fun part is that's exactly what happened. They came up with any company that I've seen do that, they come up with a stripped down version of the previous version, which was already stripped down, which is not compatible with what the customer is doing today, which means the customer is not going to buy that one.
Right.
Because, like, you moved so far away now, like, you're using newer technologies, which will not work with the old technologies that we're using, because we're not going to update our technology every 2 months, because, like, REST API came out and now it's cooler than Tickle.
The funniest part is when product management hands you a product and says, here's a product because you asked for it, but don't sell it, right? So they just did it to do a check mark saying we gave you a stripped down version, but they really don't want anybody to touch it. It's like, come on.
Another term that the product management use, oh, this is the coolest product. Why? Oh, because it does cool things. Does it do it for the customer or for you? Like,
right, exactly.
Does it make you look good or make the customer look good? So, yeah.
It's, I think, imperative for everyone in the organization, whether it's pre-sales, whether it's product management, whether it's R&D, to go live at least one day a year at the customer site and see what they do with our products.
Yeah.
Right? We develop products very differently if we did that.
That is true. I've talked to organizations that sold a product that's being used completely different by the customers than what they imagined it
to
use. And if they're smart enough, they'll learn from that and sell it like that as an option.
Right.
Some people do, some people don't. We'll see. All right. For those who want to become all-stars, is there a book or resource you would recommend that they get exposed to?
Well, so I'll start with a disclaimer. It's not a book. It's a continuous process of learning.
Okay.
Right now, I'll suggest some books that I have loved and really helped me, but it's not. If I read this book, I know everything there is to be learned. Right?
Yeah.
It's this attitude of saying I want to continuously get better at my skill. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of people focus on the next role, but if they focus on simply growing, right? Stephen Covey talks about it in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? Private victory precedes public victory, right? If I grow, opportunities will come, right? And but I'll mention some books which I loved. One is by John Maxwell. It's called Everybody Communicates, Few Connect, right?
Okay.
Outstanding book, right? If you think about how many talks we all listen to and so on, and how many podcasts we listen to, how many do we remember, how many do make an impact, right? Hopefully this is one of them, right?
I'm sure it will be.
So but everybody talks, but few connect, right? There's one called Storyteller's Secret, which actually looks at the presentations we make through the eyes of making a movie, right? And every movie has a hero, and every movie has the hero in some kind of trouble, and then every movie has the hero winning at the end, right? And but actually looks through how master presenters present, Steve Jobs, lots of different people, and how they presented their ideas, right? And show some patterns, ideas that I found very useful,
Okay. All right. No, that's good enough. 2 books is usually, it's one more than I usually get, but 3 books actually. So that's good. All right. Last question of the not so fire round. Is there a habit you are working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Yeah. So by the way, since you mentioned 3 books, I'll mention one. It's called Atomic Habits. It's a phenomenal book.
Yeah.
Outstanding book. And so I work on something every day. I'm a fan of something called skill stacks. It's not one skill, but I'll stack up lots of skills. I'm not going to be as good at every skill. I don't need a PhD in everything, but I am good at each one of them, right? There's a huge value in someone who can talk technical, but who understands sales, who understands closing processes, who understands how to articulate business value, right? Who can do discovery questions, even if a sales guy is not around, just different things. And so I spend at least 15 to 30 minutes a day, every day, to learning something new. Okay, it could be through a book, it could be through a podcast, but every day, 15 to 30 minutes, I work on something. That's something I actually learned from Atomic Habits. It's not a big week-long training session, which matters as doing something every day, right?
All right, a couple of questions. One, some would say 15 minutes is not enough to learn, and also some would say, where should I get 15 minutes from? I'm too busy. How do you, as a VP of global sales engineering, so you're probably working from 6 a.m. till like 10 p.m, maybe more, how do you have time to do that? And is it effective, 15 minutes a day?
Well, if I said an hour a day, nobody would start.
Yes.
Right. It's better to do 15 minutes a day, but every day, but 1 hour, but once a week. Right.
Yeah.
Because then you fall prey to this thing. Do I have time? Do I have not have time? Right. So 15 minutes a day is a great start. If you can do more, go do more. Right. And but 15 minutes a day is a great start. Do I have time? Do we have time? Well, we always had the same time. Post-COVID and during COVID, we have the same time as pre-COVID, which is 24 hours in a day, right?
Yeah.
We may fill our day with a lot more things, especially it seems like a lot more meetings, right?
Yep.
And we can go meeting to meeting to meeting. I actually went into an audit that I did for a week, and every 15 minutes I wrote down what did I do, right?
Yeah.
And look through to see how much of it was useful. Right. And I was able to easily find 2 to 3 hours and said, maybe it's useful for somebody else. It's not useful for me. Right.
Right.
The only one who has ownership of my time is me. That's how I approach it. right? I put in other things as it's relevant. Okay, my boss wants things. Okay, I'll put it in there. But my boss doesn't want things 100% of the time, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of junk on there that I can simply say, I'm not adding anything to you. You're not adding anything to me. I don't even know why we're meeting, right?
Right.
Especially every week, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can make it once a month, right? So you start making time, right? You start prioritizing it, and that's what I do. I prioritize it. For me, the easiest thing what I found is to read before I go to sleep, and read first thing in the morning, right?
Right.
So this morning before we started, I spent some time reading, right? And
Right.
at night, so it's easy to build a habit and connect it to an existing habit. So I
Right.
have a habit of going to sleep at night. So just before I do that,
That's strange. Nobody has that happen.
right? It doesn't always happen in pre-sales, right? Sometimes you don't sleep because you're getting something done, right?
It doesn't always happen when you have kids. I think
That's true.
pretty
In your case, yes. You
Pre-sales
have
is
plenty of
easy.
time. You wake up several times at night, don't you? So
Yeah.
good
Pre-sales
chance to
is
read.
easy. Being a father is hard. That's at least my opinion.
Yeah.
All right.
But it's
Okay.
rewarding, right?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't trade it for the world. So Ganesh, this has been amazing, and I hope you enjoyed it. You enjoyed the process. I hope the people listening will enjoy it as well. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Ramsey, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Ganesh, for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate the time you're spending with me as usual. And I have to, as usual, plug the SE hotline. If you haven't heard about it, shame on me for not letting you know about it. It is a service that I use to actually help mentor and coach and provide a resource for SEs looking to up their game, up their skill level, or aspiring SEs looking to become sales engineers. So if you're looking for help, if you feel stuck, which I get a lot of messages from people who feel stuck, don't know what to do. They don't have good coaching system. They don't know what sales engineering or sales engineers are supposed to do, even though they are sales engineers. You're not alone. I've been there, done that. Many people have as well. Check out the SE hotline if you want help. And that's it for today. What did you think about the conversation? What are your thoughts about what Ganesh talked about today? I had to re-listen to the show, and I remember just how much fun it was talking to Ganesh. So hopefully that got translated through the podcast to you. Anyways, with that, this is me signing off.